One of the other things that I'm interested to learn from you is how do you listen sympathetically to a community in order to harvest ideas and help people do problem solving on a community level rather than an individual level?
Well, you know, it depends on your own situation and your own abilities to be involved. I mean, if you're going into a developing country community intending to do development work, then my recommendation is that you actually have to live in that community, live with the ordinary people that you intend to help, and that you need to do that, you know, as long as you possibly can. Like the more months and years you spend, the better you'll be at it. Ideally, you'd learn their own language and so on. But clearly, that's also, you could also regard that as mostly unrealistic for most, you know, Western members of NGOs going overseas to work. So it's like you need to sort of work with local organisations that have got that capacity themselves, and then you kind of tap into what they're doing and help them with what they're already doing. You know, so like for example, I'm involved with Ceres Global in Melbourne, and they're doing a project in India which is building some school buildings for teachers to live in a remote village in India. Now they're working with an NGO there which is run by middle-class people who are running a kind of private school system for the poor tribal rural people. Now, the Ceres Global by itself, if it couldn't possibly enter that area without that cooperation and connection, and they certainly couldn't do anything helpful unless they work closely with them. And I think one of the problems that Ceres Global ran into in the first iteration, they tried to kind of bring a whole lot of volunteers to this village, and we're going to create these school buildings according to the latest sustainable science and stuff. And actually they ran into all sorts of problems because tradespeople couldn't access the materials that they thought they were going to be able to use. The people were not familiar with the technologies that they wanted to introduce. And what they've done in response to that is to kind of step back a bit and try and involve the local people who are already making buildings and kind of you know, develop their skills, but also to let a local architect from Mumbai handle all of these relationships with people. He's somebody, you know, like, so they've found somebody in Mumbai who's like, that's a nearby big city, who's working mainly with middle-class clients doing sustainable architecture and so on. And they can say to him, okay, we're going to be building with compressed earth bricks and we want to use bamboo, treated bamboo. And he'll be going, okay, I can handle that. And when he gets there, he'll be able to instruct the tradies in their own language how to go about it. You know, you can see, so there's this kind of like, there's all that.
Yeah.
The other thing I'd say is that in a context like Australia, obviously you need to set up little groups, you know, like gardening groups, community gardening groups, and you have clubs, you know, like, in other words, there's the model of voluntary organisations like the PNC and the Scouts and the Surf Life Saving Clubs are all very available, and the community garden movement in Australia is using that. And like, yeah, and, you know, Landcare was based upon that kind of structure and so on. So within the Australian context, you know, like, clearly you use the models of community organisation that are already available to you.
Great.
In addition to that, I'll just say this, that clearly you use the skills of listening and talking to people in their own language. Like, you know, in the Australian context, you sort of use the sort of accents and intonations and turns of phrase that people are, you know, and mirror body language and do all these kind of really obvious things like that. Yeah. I mean, if I'm interviewing someone, I do that without even thinking about it. My accent will change. Even in Africa or Indonesia, if I'm interviewing people, my accent will change. you know, and yeah. Anyway, yeah.
So it's about building your skills as a listener
Yeah.
and trying to fit in somewhat
Yeah.
so that they're
Yeah.
comfortable with
Yeah.
opening up to you.
Yeah.
What about in a conference situation? How could you imagine that a conference could go well? I mean, how do you feel about that old technique, World Cafe, or have you ever been to a conference you felt like, wow, this is really pumping? Lots of ideas are coming out.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it depends. I just find with conferences that, oh, gee, they're a strange situation. I mean, I like them for networking. You've got to be really assertive and bold and extrovert. Yeah, and you've got to go and meet people you don't know and have lunch with them, and can be very confronting. So, you know, in a sense of the sort of situations that are outside of the actual formal business of the conference are really significant in a conference.
Right. So that empty space.
Yeah. And then, but the other thing, obviously, you know, you go to papers that usually a conference is organised by you having, you know, little sessions. And in the little, someone's up the front and they're talking and they engage the audience, and can be as 15 or even 10 or 5 or it might be 40 or whatever. And then you have a question time. Well, I mean, the obvious thing is if you're presenting, you give 20 minutes for questions in an hour at least.
Right.
You know, otherwise the conference is not going to, you know, it's not going to really engage people. If it's 3 sessions in an hour and a half, which is a classic academic conference, like you would want the speakers to speak for 20 minutes at most, and maybe even only 15. The 3 speakers, you know, in other words, have half of the time each. Yeah.
So, but what some places have posters, and that's where you're just putting your ideas out, not absorbing. Well, you're reading other people's posters, but there's no interaction. So, what would be the opposite space to that, putting it out? But the opposite to that was, what would you do?
You organise some sort of group activity is the opposite.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Great.
You know, like I've done that. Like,
can you give me an example of one of your group activities?
Yeah, like I've done that with the gift economy. I've gone. All their people on this side on this half of the room will get into little groups of 6 or 4, and they'll choose a spokesperson, and they'll write down reasons why the gift economy can't possibly work. And all the people on the left-hand side of the room will do the same thing, but write down reasons why the gift economy is a great idea. And then at the end of 40 minutes, like if it's an hour session, the people from each of those groups of 6 will then get up and present the ideas of their group, and then you do chalk and talk, and you write it up as you go along.
Cool.
And like that's worth 1,000 times of me raving on about it.
Yeah.
In a situation like that, I'd talk for maybe 10 minutes. You know, out of the hour. Yeah. Like, okay, so I'd talk for 10 minutes, then there'd be 30 minutes for that, and then another 20 minutes for writing things on the board, and like ideally you'd want to then run another half an hour where you discuss the ideas on the board and let people from the discussion group rave on.
Cool. Rave on.
And I've seen, I mean, God, shit, Robin, what's this, Clayfield. I mean, I've seen her at Woodford. She did this thing at Woodford where she got everybody talking about their visions of a future utopia, and I think she gave them butcher's paper and Technicolor or something and that sort of thing. That was a similar process, and that worked really well.
Cool.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to just pause.